Good evening, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Althea. I'm always very humbled in these situations because people kind of call me an expert based on the amount of time I've been doing this and the amount of experiences I've had. But in reality, I'm an amateur compared to people who live this journey and are the real experts in it. So I'll say a few words with the caveat of that. When I asked Althea what would she like me to talk about, she said, well, think about the theme of why we're here. Maybe talk a little bit about personhood and what it means to be a person. And I thought, that's an interesting one. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the brain. I'm not going to talk about any neurons. I'm not going to talk about dementia diagnosis. I'm actually going to talk about what it means to be a person. And I thought, what an interesting topic. So what does it mean to be a person? I think it's a really interesting question to ask yourself. And I think Keith touched on a few things in his journey where people stopped seeing him as Keith, as the person, and started to impose some thinking on him that actually wasn't his reality and certainly wasn't his ability. But this diagnosis of dementia came with a label that suddenly people started to see things differently. So when we think about what does it mean to be a person, I think there's two parts to it for me, and as Althea said, I've spent 32 years walking alongside people living with dementia now, and in that journey I've learned a few things, I hope, from those amazing people. I think being a person is twofold. It's intrinsic, it's who am I? When you look in that mirror and you look at yourself and you say, who am I? You know, and that little voice, and we all have these little voices, don't we, in our heads, and they stay there. And that's nothing to do with dementia. We all have little voices in our heads that tell us good things and sometimes challenge us and sometimes tell us bad things. But we have these voices in our head, and we don't really understand that. That's a really interesting part of science, is we still really don't understand what that is. But we do have these voices in our head that talk to us and that start to, I guess, impact on who we are as a person. And so we have this intrinsic feeling of who I am as a person. And then there's the externalization of that. So how do other people see me? And there's an amazing guy in America who I've learned a lot from called Michael Verdi, who runs an organization called Memory Bridge. And he talks a lot about this. He talks about this notion of dismemberment that people living with dementia often go through. That their community, their network, their friends, their family sometimes really struggle. And therefore they start to disconnect from them. And there's almost a dismemberment happens. And so there's this externalization about you as a person and how other people treat you. And I think back to when I was a very fresh-faced 20-year-old student nurse in the UK, and it was just one of those moments in time when I was so fortunate because I got invited to a lecture at Bradford University by a guy who I'd not really heard of called Professor Tom Kitwood. And Professor Kitwood was a real pioneer in helping us understand a different model to the traditional medical model of understanding dementia. And this lecture was on personhood. And I went along as this student nurse, not really knowing too much, although I kind of knew that what I was being taught was actually wrong. And I knew that because I'd sat with people living with dementia, and I'd got to know them. And I saw beyond the clinical labels and the behaviour labels that kept getting attached. And so I kind of felt a square peg in a round hole during my nurse training. Because I kept being told that this was happening because the brain was deteriorating. And yet when I got to really know people, it made me realise that that was just a part of this puzzle. And Tom was the first person who I actually heard who helped me to start to understand that what a person goes through on this journey of dementia is very multifaceted and very complex. And to just bring it down to the simplicity of the death of neurons was doing people a great disservice. So fast forward into the next part of my career, which was the personal experience, because my grandma was then diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. And this was back in the day, in the mid-90s, when we really didn't know what Lewy body dementia was. And I was a dementia nurse, and I didn't know what it was, so I quickly went and Googled, well, we didn't have Google back then. I quickly went to the library, got my Rolodex cards. Younger people will go, what else are you talking about? And got these books out on Lewy body dementia and learned all about it because I knew this was the journey that me and my grandma would go on together. And through this journey, it really reinforced to me this notion of person, and that whilst, yes, abilities change, A person's reality may change. A lot of things will change for somebody living with dementia. The person remains. And what was really hard was trying to help the people who were helping my grandma understand that. Now, my grandma, she was what we would class as the salt of the earth, call a spade a spade. She was a trawlerman's wife, okay? She was brought up on the fish docks. So her vocabulary was always very colourful. And here she was now developing dementia, where the support staff who were caring for her were kind of going, she's got behavioural problems. And I'm going, no, she hasn't. She's always sworn like that. This is who she is. She's a very strong lady. She's been the matriarch of our family. She took us in when we were in trouble. She was the one we went to. And she still has that need, and that's the person she still is. So get beyond labelling her with behaviour because of dementia and start to see the person she is. So I guess on that journey, it's really helped me to understand, and I hope I can share a little bit with you, because I know it's hard, and Keith's articulated it much better than I ever could, around how things change and then how, both for you, how that might feel, but how other people might feel about you as well. And I think there's a big piece of work for us to do as a society in that. And you know, I hope I'm helping with that movement, and I know events like this certainly are, because we're breaking down that stigma and we're breaking down those barriers. And we're saying people with dementia are first and foremost people. They have the same rights, they have the same right to citizenship, they have the same right to a meaningful and valued life as anybody else. Diagnosis doesn't take that away. So I look around this room and I see the joy and I see the energy and I see the amazing creation in the artworks, and it just reinforces to me that dementia doesn't take that away, you know? And that events like this and opportunities like this is where dementia care needs to move to. I was speaking to the federal government just last week, and they said to me, if you could sprinkle your magic dust and train aged care staff in 2 things, what would it be? And I went, oh, okay, that's a good question. And I'd already come to a conclusion after spending the last 18 months in residential care, that the 2 things that are really missing for many people, not just aged care staff, but anybody interacting with people with dementia, is the difficulty in communication and the difficulty in connection. And if I could train our aged care and healthcare staff in 2 things, it would be those things. How to communicate, how to connect in a genuine relationship, not in a transactional relationship, which is what most aged care is about. So, to wrap up, because I could talk forever and Alfie knows that. It's really dangerous giving me a microphone. But to wrap up, thank you for having me here. Personhood is absolutely essential in this journey of dementia. The arts play a massive part in that, in my experience, and Alfie has taught me so much in that. The spirit of a person does not diminish because of dementia. It diminishes because of what we do with people with dementia. So, you know, that's my crusade for the last part of my career. So thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here.